Of the Star Report are just beginning to be felt. Joining us now in the ONN newsroom is political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim is also an expert when it comes to political rhetoric. And Jim, a lot of rhetoric being tossed around tonight. And when is this all going to stop, if ever?
I don't know. We're kind of in a no man's land right now with the technology side of this. I mean, the report being released on the internet, it's unprecedented. Something on this scale. So this is going to be kind of like an uncharted cruise for us. I think we're just going to have to follow it. Could go on quite a while. It depends on where Clinton digs in his heels, on what issues, what he wants to talk about. But the fact that the report is on the net is a whole other dimension here. And the American public they're not going to need people to interpret it for them. They're just going to be able to read it. A lot of the stuff is fairly, it's fairly graphic. It's easy to grasp. Again, it doesn't need a lot of interpretation.
You know what, Jim? Maybe it shouldn't even be there, though, because if the House Judiciary Committee is getting ready to do its thing and come up with maybe articles of impeachment, maybe this is like not having your right to a fair trial. Maybe this should never have even come out today.
Well, that'll no doubt be part of the legal argument. And something, since President Clinton made his speech to the American public about the Lewinsky affair, he hasn't given up any legal ground. And the fact he had no time to see the report before it was released to the American public, that could be part of his ammunition, his legal team. And especially when you consider the precedent set, or followed, I should say, with Newt Gingrich when he saw the report that was released on him like 7 days before the American public got it. So yeah, it could definitely be a variable. Exactly.
Apples and oranges. We're not giving President Clinton a fair shake then if you compared it to the House ethics rules. When it comes to the issue of public opinion, of course, as you mentioned, public opinion versus partisan politics, with this report out there now, public opinion may outweigh any partisan politics that even takes place in the House. You think?
Sure, sure. Oddly enough, I got my start doing rhetorical analysis with the Nixon, the Watergate affair, and this was back when I was in college, about 24 years ago, and I see striking parallels where public opinion, there were Republicans that dug in the face of the testimony, of what the investigation showed, that Nixon was clearly guilty of wrongdoing. People still stood by him. Just said that good guy, just kind of in the wrong place, wrong time. Ehrlichman and Haldeman had done the bad stuff. He didn't really know much about it till too late. Same thing with Clinton. I think the dyed-in-the-wool Democrats are standing by him. Similar kind of way. He's a good guy. He was seduced. These kinds of things, basically making excuses. And we can see this drag on and on. I think this could be the stage for what we'll see easily in the next few weeks, if not months.
Start your memoirs now, Jim. We're going to be rewriting history. Jim Schnell, ONN political analyst, speaking with us tonight about the release of the Ken Starr report. Thanks, Jim. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And
joining us now in our ONN studio is Jim Schnell, ONN political analyst. Jim, first of all, the videotape deposition could be the second bombshell dropped on the Clinton administration. What would the impact of that be, maybe, if any? What would the impact of public opinion be?
Well, if using last week as a lesson is helpful this time, it's going to make quite a splash. And I think, looking at this from a mass media theorist perspective, it could have much more of a splash when we actually see what the president said, how he said it, a lot of those nonverbal cues, the fact that he got up and stomped out of the room a couple of times. When we read the Starr report, we kind of read it with the idea that, well, this is what Starr's concluded. But when we see the president responding to these questions, we're going to start making, as a public, judgments of, is this guy telling the truth, or what's his main point here? How is he going to defend himself? I think it's going to be much more revealing.
Jim, one thing that's been very revealing has been the speed of all this information that's been coming out. The Starr report dropped in our laps, all the information and maybe even more than you really wanted to know. How is the impact of having such a technological society and a very high-tech kind of a media out there impacting this entire event?
I'll tell you, John, there was a theorist about 30 years ago, a fellow named Marshall McLuhan, and he predicted much of what we're experiencing today when he said the medium will become the message. And we're seeing that to a degree today in that the technology is allowing us to move much faster. News is coming at us much faster. I call this hyper news, where we have more coming at us at a faster speed, and it's affecting the story. So I think we're not having that much time to digest it. We're not having much time to logically think through it. And again, this brings up that problem of image versus substance, where image is going to carry more weight than it should. The public is basing its thinking on the image much more, whereas courts and to a lesser degree Congress will be focusing on substance.
From the emotional factor to the factual factor, in other words, do you think that maybe that is one reason why a lot of people that call into our talk show, Ohio's Talking, are saying we've heard enough about it, this is about sex, this has gone way too far, forget about this? Are they reacting to an emotional precursor or to an emotional stimulant rather than about the facts?
Well, yeah, I think excellent summation. Yeah, it is much about the emotional level, because the facts of the problem here for Clinton is that he lied before the grand jury. Had he had sex with Monica Lewinsky and not lied about it, he would not be in nearly as much hot water as he is today. But his problem, his impeachable offenses, surround his lying to the grand jury and tampering with other people that would be testifying to the grand jury.
And political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, as always, very insightful. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the president's situation is
Now is ONN political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, thanks for your time tonight. First of all, let me start with the ONN Mason-Dixon poll. Overall thoughts of this poll?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of surprises here. There's still a considerable amount of support for the president given what has been happening. There's still a lot of support for the president, especially from women, but we've seen that all along. So I don't think there's really anything shocking at this point.
Do you think it's still kind of early for some of these poll results to be coming out? We're all waiting to see what the deposition has to say. But we've been also talking about the high-tech world of media and all this information that comes flooding out. These polls, if they don't ask the question the right way, do you think that people then are still making up their minds and that affects the accuracy of these polls?
Oh yeah, for sure, John. I think we could have poll backlash or polls affecting polls. Sure, I mean, people see this stuff, and I think something we haven't even thought about very much yet, but there's going to be a saturation effect, much like we had with the O.J. Simpson case. I mean, where people are just going to kind of get tired of hearing about it, but the media is going to have to keep clobbering the public with it because it's such a relevant issue. But sure, I think it's going to be a form of information overload.
We heard from a nationally respected pollster today, Ed Goas, and he was saying one of the things that could really be impacted here are Democratic candidates statewide and also in some of the federally elected races as well, Congress races, Senate races, basically because according to their poll, Jim, was that the people who are the least likely to come out there and vote are Democrats, and they're leading by 8 or 6 percentage points, so more or less, put it in layman's terms tonight, the people who are Democrats may be just a bit disenchanted with this entire Starr report, upset to hear what their president has been doing, and just aren't going to go out there and vote. Do you think there's going to be any kind of voter apathy that way?
Well, if the election was tomorrow, I would say yes. I think that could be a definite variable. But, you know, consider Election Day is almost 7 weeks off, so a lot can happen between now and then. There could be a rally for the president. Depending on how this deposition affects, you know, what public reaction is to that. So there could be a rally for him. I mean, I think the public mood right now is very fickle, and it can change overnight.
So this deposition could come out maybe tomorrow, maybe on Saturday, and really irritate the public enough to where they say, we don't want to have any more of this, leave the guy in office, censure him, but we want to be done with this thing. That's a possibility.
Sure. Oh, yeah. An unknown with the tape that will come out of the Clinton deposition is I don't think we're ready for just how much that's going to impact us to actually see him speaking this way. We've never seen him this way on that, you know, that much of footage with him this way, and, you know, in this kind of circumstance. Whereas the Starr report, I think we were kind of prepared for that, but I think this tape, when it comes out, I think it's going to have a double punch on us.
From black and white print on paper to seeing is believing, possibly then with the videotape. ONN political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, thanks for your insight tonight.
Have a good evening.
John Kerry, Democrat from Massachusetts today, calls this whole matter possibly the 1998 government shutdown issue. Do you think this could be the governmental shutdown issue just a couple years ago?
I think there's a good possibility of it. I think we as a society are going to learn, don't ask questions we don't want to know the answers to, or don't investigate issues we don't want to know the answers to. We've had the big splash, the excitement of the Starr report, the Clinton testimony. Now that we know what we know, we just can't ignore it. It has to be addressed. There has to be some kind of finding from this as far as what the result's going to be, whether it's in favor of the Democrats or in favor of the Republicans. Now that this has been exposed, we have to follow through with it. We have to let the House, we have to let the Judiciary Committee follow through on their what their charge is.
But with Dick Gephardt's comments today about getting this whole thing done in a month, I wonder if the Democratic Party on the Hill believes that they now have the upper hand with the public opinion polls and can bully the Republicans and the entire House into getting this settled a month early. Newt Gingrich doesn't want that to happen, but how big of a part will public opinion play in this entire ordeal of getting a deal cut?
I don't think the Congress is going to. I don't think they're going to be affected that much by public opinion on this. Public opinion polls have been very important. It's moved so much of this issue along, but I don't think they're going to be swayed very much by it, because they're going to be judged not only by public opinion, but they're going to be judged by history. So if they let themselves be bullied by public opinion, I think the long-term historical record will make them look much worse.
Maybe go down as spineless in the annals of history. That would be a bigger embarrassment, perhaps. So what about the whole idea of the political impact in the November election if they could get some kind of a deal of censorship, a big fine, taxing part of his pension? What about getting a deal done before the November elections? Do you think that has any possibility? The Democrats would like to see that happen, though.
Well, for sure, yeah, the Democrats would like to see that happen. But I think also the Democrats, they might kind of relish if it doesn't happen, because the public opinion is that, yeah, let's get this behind us, let's get done. There's really not going to be much more excitement with it. I mean, every once in a while we'll get little splashes like the Tripp testimony, the Lewinsky testimony, but these are minor compared to the big things we've seen thus far. But I think that the Democrats, yeah, they'll push to get this done, but knowing full well it probably won't, they can kind of lean towards the area, towards the direction that the public opinion is, and kind of make it look like, yeah, that they're with the public on this, and that the Republicans are kind of doing a gridlock, even if that's not the case, or even if it is the case. So I think the Democrats stand in a strange way to win both sides of that.
Oh, and then political analyst Jim Schnell, as always, very insightful. Jim, we thank you.
Thank you.
And President Clinton visited Cincinnati last week for a Democratic fundraiser, and now it appears he'll be back in the Buckeye State October 2nd. Officials from Mary Boyle's Senate campaign say President Clinton is today, but Barney Frank, one of the members of the House Judiciary Committee, came out and said this is nothing other than a Republican plan to drag their feet and hurt the Democrats in the November election. Do you think he has a valid point?
Oh, sure, and I think it's a strategy that I think even the Republicans, if they're being honest about it, would say sure, that would be something they'd like to see happen as a result of this.
What about the whole idea now of the House Judiciary Committee voting this out of their committee for the full House to take a look at by the 5th and 6th of October? Do you think that they have dragged their feet, so to speak, or do you think they've really tried to speed up the process here?
Well, you know, I tell you, John, I think with the House Judiciary Committee, I think they're moving along now they're just setting in at a fairly methodical pace. And I think that they're going to be doing what they should be doing in accordance with the law. I mean, if they decide to pursue it. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong that he should be impeached. I don't know about that. But as far as their role, I think they will move along very methodical. And we're seeing this notion of impeachment, the proceeding, getting a life of its own. And once it gets a life of its own, it will not care about public opinion.
Overall, most people think it's a foregone conclusion that when whatever does come out of the Judiciary Committee, the full House will approve it basically on a partisan vote. Then it will go over to the Senate for the full impeachment inquiry. Do you think that we will see this whole ordeal go to a full impeachment kind of a trial, and then it won't even get that far because they don't have the votes in the Senate? More or less just a major way of writing down history in President Clinton's legacy.
I think as this unfolds with, if it goes to the House and on to the Senate, and if the Senate turns it down, it's kind of a convenient out for everybody, and both sides have kind of met some objectives they're trying to do, and ultimately the loser, I think, will be the legacy of President Clinton as far as his own morality, his own ethics. But as far as his policies, I don't think his policies would take a hit on this.
What's the one thing a lot of people have been talking somewhat about Al Gore, the chance of him becoming the next president of the United States, if indeed President Clinton would resign, or which probably will not happen at this point, but if this did happen to go all the way through impeachment and the president would be thrown out of office, Al Gore stands to look pretty good right now?
Well, he'll look good as far as getting to be president and appearing presidential, but one has to ask, would he be running into what President Ford ran into as far as pardoning Nixon? And if Gore pardons Clinton in any way, which he probably, this is going to come up, that is going to taint him pretty bad. So he's going to appear presidential, but he's also going to have, I suppose, the downside of what it means to be president at times.
O&M political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, thanks very much for your insight tonight.
My pleasure, John. Have a good evening.
And here is an idea. New revelations coming out of the White House or out of the House Judiciary Committee, other than perhaps the release of the Linda Tripp tapes and also maybe the other 60,000 pages of supporting documentation. How big of a role will these things play, do you think?
I'll tell you, John, this is getting to be a lot more predictable now. I mean, we knew before today that these were going to be coming out, and these are smaller splashes than we've seen in the past with the release of the Starr report and the Clinton tape this past Monday. Now things are going to be a little bit more predictable. It's going to be surprising that we haven't read the transcripts, but we know the transcripts are coming. So I think we're going to see the whole process get to be a little bit more predictable till about October 5th or 6th, when they actually make a decision on whether to proceed with the impeachment inquiry.
And don't you think, though, it's a foregone conclusion that there will be an inquiry there October 5th or 6th that the full House will vote on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't think they're going to say it yet, because it would still be premature to say it, that it's going to happen. But yeah, I think to say it's a foregone conclusion from our part, yeah, we can pretty much assume it. Now, I would think definitely it's going to happen. But they're not going to step beyond their bounds, because if they step beyond their bounds and say before the fact that they have voted that they are going to do it, then it makes them look like that they've already decided what they're going to do in advance.
Sure. What do you think about the White House strategy right now? It seems that the Democrats on Capitol Hill, their best defense is a good offense. They're going after Republicans. They're saying everything is a big partisan attack these days. Let's get this settled. Let's get this over with. Are they just protecting their president, or do they? What is the object tonight? It really does seem like the best defense is a good offense if you're a Democrat on Capitol Hill.
Well, if you're a Democrat on Capitol Hill, I think the name of the game is damage control. If you can do damage control by protecting the president, by distancing yourself from the president, I think we're going to see Democrats. There's not going to be a unified chorus with this. They're going to be saying different things to different people, different circumstances, and it would depend on who their constituency is, depending on how much support there is in their home districts for the president.
This coming week on Friday, President Clinton will be in Cleveland for a fundraiser for U.S. Senate candidate Mary Boyle. She was quoted as saying there was nothing in the Lewinsky investigation that would want to make her rescind her invitation to the president. Do you think that this is a good strategy for Democratic candidates to have Bill Clinton by their side taking pictures? Is this something possibly the Republican opposition, no matter what state you're in, could take and use in a campaign ad against you?
Well, I would hope she's being advised closely on this, because President Clinton is going to want to be out in the country, in the nation, in the heartland, someplace like Ohio especially, appearing to be presidential. Now, as he works to be presidential, he's working on the capital that other people have, that is the credibility of other people. So he's a little low right now, and so as he reaches up to other Democrats, he's pulling them down at the same time.
O&M political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, is always very insightful. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Some pages of documentation also come out today regarding the Clinton investigation. How damaging will this stuff be to the American president?
I'll tell you, John, I think it's small scale. It certainly pales in comparison to the stuff that's come out thus far, his testimony, the Starr report. So as we talked about last week, those were the big splashes, the Starr report, the Clinton testimony that was, tape that we saw. And these are smaller splashes. I think as people read through them, as the lawyers go through them, as the journalists go through them, there's information there, but I don't think anything what I would call explosive.
Stuff that we most likely already know then.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's stuff that we've been told will be coming down the pike, and there may be some variations there, but I think things are moving along, I think, very predictably. Next Monday and Tuesday, this story should come right back to page 1 news, in that there will be a decision be made whether or not to proceed with an impeachment inquiry. And at the forefront of this, the big question is this President Clinton lying to the grand jury, is that an impeachable offense? Is his obstructing justice, tampering with people that might, were testifying, etc., was that an impeachable offense? And so that's going to be the big focus, and I think we're going to see it come right back to page one news next week.
Whether people want it to be that way or not, and it's been remarkable how many people thought the Starr report should not be broadcast to the public, how many people thought the videotape deposition should not come out to the public as well, and now the other documentation coming out today. Do you think this has a numbing effect or outrages the majority of the American public when all this information comes out? Could that harm the impeachment inquiry into the president when this thing goes before the House of Representatives? In other words, simply, could this backfire, this whole process backfire with public opinion?
Oh, it could. I think public opinion, I don't think anything coming out this past week is going to change anybody's minds about anything. It's really just been more of what we saw before as far as its condemning of Clinton, and it's just more of the same. So I don't see much of a change of direction. If anything, I think it's just shoring up attitudes pro-Clinton and against Clinton.
O&M political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, thanks for your insight tonight.
Thank you.
Earlier this afternoon that were defeated, they wanted to set up a timeline, a definition of what an impeachable offense is, and also the scope of this investigation, limiting the hearing to the Monica Lewinsky matter. It didn't get done. 21-16 was the vote, strictly partisan Republican-Democrat kind of vote. Your overall opinion then of today's proceedings?
Pretty predictable, John. I think what we're going to see here is neither side giving an inch, both sides making the other side fight for everything they get. This idea of a timeline, there's nothing that's going to make them hold to that. They can agree in principle, but as matters evolve, that can be modified. So I think we're going to see our kind of a version of gridlock here, where we're going to see the Democrats trying to narrow everything, try to shorten everything, the Republicans trying to broaden and stretch out.
Were you at all surprised to hear Howard Berman, the representative from California, the Democrat, trying to stoke up some bipartisan support for a bill that will get rid of the timeline, but what it would in effect do as well, it would accept Ken Starr's narrative or the facts in this report as actualities, as actually being the fact, yet not drawing any conclusions from the Starr report, just accepting the narrative as facts in an effort for bipartisan support today out of this committee. Did that shock you at all?
Yeah, it did surprise me, because this is legalese that lawyers are used to working with. The American public is going to listen to this and go, wait a minute, guilty or not guilty? Did he do it or not? Is he fessing up to this, or where does Clinton stand on this? We're going to be looking for some direction from him. I don't think the American public is going to be very comfortable with this at all, as far as how we, with our public mind, come to understand this idea of not disputing the facts, but accepting, conclusions. I mean, it's a very gray, muddy area.
And maybe another gray and muddy area is the impact this Judiciary Committee meeting, and if we do get an impeachment inquiry, how that will affect the November election. But you can turn that around and go vice versa, how the November election will be affecting this Judiciary Committee, because if we do go to a full impeachment vote, we may not have the same members of Congress nor senators on Capitol Hill. Do you see an impact on the election on this inquiry?
I see it more the way we initially think about it, as far as how this will affect the November election. The November election, sure, there might be some people changing houses, but I think, or changing seats, losing their seats to other people, but I think those that are serving on the House Judiciary Committee are going to have, they're going to be sitting fairly pretty, I think, in that they're taking a role of importance with the functioning of the government. And they're going to be seen by their constituency of having high degrees of importance, perhaps more than they really deserve. But I think that is going to help people that are on the House Judiciary Committee retain their seats. So it's going to swing both ways, but I think by and large this is going to affect the November elections and vice versa.
O&M political analyst Jim Schnell is insightful as always. Jim, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Have a good evening, John.
The entire proceedings this afternoon, 258-176, 31 Democrats siding with the Republicans and voting for a full and unlimited impeachment inquiry. Your response to 31 Democrats?
I'll tell you, John, they're in a tight squeeze there. I mean, this is a historic event, and as much as the White House might have been squeezing them to vote no, their constituencies. I mean, they're just getting ready to go home to their home districts and their constituencies. I mean, they would have been, you know, having their voters breathe down their necks about it. So I'm surprised that there wasn't more Democrats that voted no.
Ted Strickland, Democrat from the 6th District, embroiled in a pretty tight race with the current Lieutenant Governor. He voted no on the overall plan, but did try to support the limited scope plan that the Democrats had proposed earlier in the day. What's your response to that? Is Ted Strickland going to have to face some tough questions now from constituents or not?
Oh, sure, sure. Especially, I think, maybe not right now, but as this unfolds, the impeachment inquiry unfolds, and if the tide turns strong, you know, fairly strong against President Clinton, then I mean, Strickland's going to be on record as saying that he supported this guy, and we saw this happen with the Nixon situation. The people that supported Nixon, I mean, they paid dues on that for about 10 years after that if they stayed in political life.
Bob Dole recounting how he barely won his district, of course, just being a Republican that year. Ken Starr expected to release more information. Also, Susan Weber Wright expected to release the president's deposition from January in the Paula Jones case. More damaging stuff to come, Jim.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's going to be fairly predictable. I think it's going to be more of the same. There's not going to be anything earth-shattering from the Willie situation, but it's going to be more. It's just going to shore up Starr's case and really the case overall against the president, and that this is going to be an open-ended investigation. There'll be some other surprises come in, but I think it's going to be fairly predictable. Not so much the process isn't going to be predictable because we haven't been down this path that often in our country's history, but it's going to be predictable. The Republicans on one side, Democrats on another, and there's going to be a continual support for both sides, and I think it'll just be kind of a battle lines have been drawn, and they're going to stay, you know, digging the trenches.
And after we heard today that 2 Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee themselves did not even bother to take a look at any of the information inside Ken Starr's report, you can see how vile the partisanship is, maybe on both sides of the aisle, if we just come right out and say it. With that in mind then, Jim, final question, how long is this whole thing going to take to get done in the inquiry?
Well, John, the other day, what was it, 3 days ago, my hunch was Easter. I think we're going to be looking, you know, if Henry Hyde was talking about January 1st, I think realistically, again, with an open-ended investigation, I think we can expect at least to Easter before this thing would wind up and move into the next stage.
And political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, thanks for your insight tonight.
My pleasure, John.
All right, so
from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee is recognized.
If you're just tuning in tonight, you're watching ONN coverage live from Washington, D.C., of course, at the House Judiciary Committee hearings. Once again, a very heated debate. However, as the one congressman said, 0 for 3 so far on the facts. Joining us tonight from Ohio Dominican College is an expert in political rhetoric. Plenty of that going on tonight on the Hill. Jim Schnell.
Oh, John, that's the bulk of it, is a rhetorical balance back and forth, and there isn't that much substance really there. I think they could take everything we've heard today and summarize it into a far short amount of time, but it's gotten amazingly theatrical.
Nobody is convincing anybody of anything.
No, and they know it. I think it's just a lot of posturing, much like what we've seen all along, but eventually push will come to shove here, where they're going to have to go one way or the other.
And one of the big things we've been talking about during the day about the allegations against the president meeting the impeachment standard, but one of the first people to testify this morning, former U.S. Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach, said impeachment is not a punishment to the president. It is merely there to restore public opinion and faith in the government. Removing a president basically is there to say, hey, public, look, we understand that you have no confidence in the president, but there is plenty of confidence in the president with a 60% approval rating tonight.
Yeah, I think if I was one of the representatives with this House Judiciary Committee, I'd be very careful about following public opinion, because it can be blowing this way today, that way tomorrow. They have a rule of law that should guide them. The popular decision is not always the right decision. Mm-hmm. And public opinion may support them today, that 60%, but a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, that support may be gone, and they're going to be left saying, well, we just followed the polls.
Right, we follow the polls and not the rule of law, and that is also one thing that they're really talking a lot about, the rule of law, saying that nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it ever address censuring a president. It is impeachment or it is nothing.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty strong argument.
Yeah, it's a shame there isn't a middle ground, but there isn't. And I'm not even saying that impeachment is the answer, But I think they need to get down and look at the facts, get away from a lot of this posturing, get away from looking at what the polls say, and look at what the facts say, match it up with what the Constitution tells them, the Federalist Papers, and then make a decision. Do the facts lead us to impeachment? If not, no. If yes, then yes. But this idea of using censorship as a middle ground, I don't see it to censure him. To me, it's kind of like apples and oranges. It's just on a different playing field.
Sheila Jackson Lee now testifying at the committee. She's not testifying. She's a member of the House Judiciary Committee. She is throwing out some questions and some statements. We want to go back to the Hill now.
To my chagrin, to my appalling understanding, broke into a psychiatrist's office of an American. Could you ever imagine? And then the use of the CIA and the FBI. My question to you, as I read from allegations of our Office of Independent Counsel, as he charges abuse of office. The President repeatedly and unlawfully invoked the executive privilege to conceal evidence of his personal misconduct from the grand jury. The President...
Without having heard from one fact witness, either produced by counsel for the President or produced by the committee. And again, I want to read something.
You've been watching live Ohio News Network coverage of the House Judiciary Committee inquiry into impeachment, and as you heard right there, not one fact witness, and that was even a Democrat bringing that up again. So when it comes to panels, Jim Schnell, you're an expert in political rhetoric. When do you expect us to hear from a fact witness? Because Greg Craig started off the day today, the White House's special counsel, by saying the President's testimony, and this is in the federal grand jury deposition, was evasive, incomplete, misleading, even maddening at times, but not perjury.
Yeah, John, if we don't have facts being presented, then one must ask, what has the last 11 hours been? Okay, what is being presented? And it's conjecture, it's opinion, it's spin, if we don't have facts, we're doing more damage. It would be better not to say anything than to have.
We have heard the same thing over and over and over, regardless if it was a Republican called expert witness from Harvard or Yale or Princeton, or if it was a Democrat called witness. And one thing that has really surprised me, maybe shocked me, and perhaps I shouldn't have been shocked, but at the partisanship from the witnesses themselves and how combative they have been today. In fact, the man from Princeton, Sean Willens, the professor, refused to be quiet, and he said, if you believe they do rise, and we're talking about the offenses, they do rise to that level of an impeachable offense, you'll vote for impeachment and take your risks at going down in history with the zealots and fanatics.
Yeah, when I heard this, I thought, oh, what a scare tactic, and I hope our representatives are smart enough to see above that. That is part of their job, that sometimes that they should vote, whether it's for impeachment, not for impeachment, whatever. They should not be guided by this kind of weight. It should be driven by the facts and how they interpret those facts. But to vote one way for fear of being labeled a zealot or a reactionary or a hardliner or one of these terms, I mean, that's dangerous.
Jim, this is a guy of academia.
Yeah.
This is a man coming from your end of the world.
Yeah.
He's from Princeton.
Yeah.
And being a college professor yourself, I would think that if you were called to be on this committee or to testify before this committee, you would approach it in a totally different way, being an expert in rhetoric.
Yeah, I would like to think, I don't know what he's thinking when he throws out a statement like that, other than if he is looking at much the same way we are, that this is not a fact-driven proceeding, and how can he get his view across? And it is. It's just one of these pathos, as Aristotle would say, scare tactics. It plays off this whole fear thing, plays into the emotions, not the logic. So he may be smarter than we're giving him credit for, but that's one way of getting your point across. Certainly not logically, though.
All right, Ohio Republican Steve Chabot was shaking his head on the cutaway when the professor said that today. He just shook his head. It enraged him. Let's go now live back to the House Judiciary Committee and hear from Steve Chabot.
The witnesses here essentially have really addressed the facts, has been brought up a number of times, but this is supposed to talk about the facts and clear up everything. On page 77, and I haven't had a chance, and I doubt whether any other member has had a chance to read the whole thing, but on page 77, in the President's attempt to clear up this whether he was alone with Ms. Lewinsky, and he, of course, had indicated that he couldn't remember or he wasn't alone with her. Their explanation of clearing up why the President's submission in here indicates, and this is their statement, the term alone is vague unless a particular geographic space is identified. That's supposed to clear up the definition of alone. Let me read that again. The term alone is vague unless a particular geographic space is identified. Mr. Benvenisti, let me ask you, can our system of justice work at all if witnesses parse words like this when the common sense meaning, like alone, ought to be pretty clear?
I agree that there has been...
Back to this ONN special report. We've been covering live the House Judiciary impeachment hearings all day long for you. Jim Schnell, you're an expert in rhetoric, obviously, and we were talking about people being disenchanted, the youth of America being disenchanted with this entire bunch of political rhetoric on the Hill.
Yeah, John, what scares me about this is that it erodes public confidence in the system. A democracy it's a teeter-totter. I mean, it's a balance. And if we get enough people who don't vote, who don't care about what's happening with the system that we all have a vested interest in, it's scary what can come out of that.
We have low voter turnout already.
Yeah.
40-some% or less, vote in primaries. Usually a lot less than that vote in primaries. And the general election in Ohio this year was like 46% people turning out, I think, to vote. And a gubernatorial election is at stake. And so if you disenchant the American populace, the hardworking American, real American people of this country and of this state, pretty soon you start electing ex-pro wrestlers to gubernatorial posts and things like that.
Isn't that indicative of the signs of the times, that somebody like that would get elected, and not that he's cannot do well?
A Navy SEAL, he's got some qualifications there.
Yeah,
former mayor.
And he should be, if that's who the people vote, then that's who should be elected. But to me, it's a sign of the times when somebody like that, who wasn't, 5 years ago grooming himself towards that, can step into that, that kind of position of leadership, that I'm afraid we may be seeing more reactionary things like that happening.
It should be a red flag and a real wake-up call to the people on Capitol Hill. Let's go back live now to Capitol Hill and the House Judiciary Committee inquiry.
Market is doing well, people are working, and that might be true. I must say I never...
...of a trial. So if you do a censure and then the president may face indictment when he leaves office, we have now prejudiced his case. So
One's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that?
Sentence or two.
That is exactly the question. That is why censure is such a controversial issue, not because maybe so much it's, one, not listed in the Constitution as a punishment for any kind of officer, or the president nonetheless, but also President Clinton, Jim Schnell, is not going to agree to pleading guilty or admitting guilt that he did perjure himself, because he does face the possibility of being prosecuted after leaving office.
Sure. Yeah, John, this is continuing to be much like a game of chess, where every move has a potential counter move and a move that can happen down the road in the game, and eventually I think this is going to have to come to a standstill and change gears and start looking at the facts and looking at judging this the way we should be judging it, because President Clinton has a number of things going on here with this case. Again, not only now, but down the road, and he has, legally, his lawyers would have to be watching that.
And legal bills are mounting up for the president. He just agreed to a $750,000 settlement with Paula Jones, and that is basically one of the big things that got him here in the first place, not just the conduct with Monica Lewinsky. When we get to the whole issue, though, getting back to the censorship thing, some people think that, well, okay, the American people don't want to see the president tossed out of office. But what if you did take it all the way through impeachment? He's impeached, but he's not tossed out of office because you don't have the votes in the Senate. Would that not be the ultimate censorship for this president who refuses to resign, gives these obnoxious answers back in this 81-page questionnaire that Henry Hyde sent him?
Yeah, to me, it's similar to some of the criminal applications in law we have these days, where we look at the circumstances so much, the Menendez brothers or whatever, where the punishment ends up not having any teeth in it, and it just is kind of an image thing, and it gets the person off the hook. Everybody walks away with a smile. But in this case, I think what's damaged is the whole idea of the presidency.
And what is that, and how much has it been tainted, and what kind of precedent does this set? Does the next time this happens, does that person, can they go through this knowing that they're just going to have some kind of letter of reprimand in their file?
And one of the professors today, when they talked about that whole issue of just going ahead and impeaching the president, knowing that you can't throw him out of office because you don't have the votes, called that perverted logic, the wrong way to go. So maybe there are no easy answers when it comes to this. So let's go right back to the Judiciary Committee hearing. And House Representative Marty Meehan.
Politically safe. All you're saying is, hey, look, there's enough here. Why don't you guys over in the Senate handle it? What do you think of this attempt to draw the analogy between us, this committee in the House, and an ordinary criminal grand jury?
I think that your responsibility, because it is constitutional,
and in addition to attacking the prosecutor, they have said, well, tell how bad Watergate was. So
exactly how bad Watergate was compared to today, Jim Schnell. A lot of people say apples and oranges when it comes to comparing the two cases.
Yeah, I'll tell you, John, I am surprised there's so much linkage with Watergate. I mean, to me, it's like comparing Super Bowls or something. I mean, where you got different teams involved, there's different circumstances, there's entirely different context than whether you're Republican or Democrat. I don't see the connection that much, other than it's the last time we had this impeachment inquiry come up. But it's just a different kind of case.
And it was a very obvious abuse of power in the Nixon case, obviously. But the presidential wordsmithing that is going on tonight is absolutely unreal. And the 184-page rebuttal, we've been talking about getting to the facts, and so have the representatives. The White House sent over just about an hour ago, if you've been watching, a 184-page rebuttal of the facts in the prosecutorial referral. Anyway, on page 77, it was talking about being alone with Monica Lewinsky and the testimony from Betty Curry as she was talking about the president, quizzing her about, we were never alone, were we? And anyway, the definition of alone in the White House rebuttal was, alone is vague unless a particular geographic space is identified. And here we are, we're talking about the facts, and we're talking about more presidential wordsmithing.
Yeah, John, I'm hoping what this leads us to, in one way I'm chagrined to see this kind of thing going on, but I'm hoping the public will respond to this with a frustration that says, you know, it brings up the old question of where's the beef, let's get down to the
substance.
Kick
somebody in the pants,
yeah,
and let's just have some plain talking, because by golly, when it comes down just to your real American, the people who go to work every day, put in their 40, 50 hours a week, come home, they turn this stuff on, and they see this, I'll guarantee you, they'll say, the biggest bunch of idiots, these are the people we have on Capitol Hill, Republican, Democrat, Independent, or otherwise. These people don't have a lick of common sense.
Yeah, and I think if the average American performed this way in their day-to-day jobs, you would run a chance of losing your jobs. And that's where I think we come up with this throw the bums out thing on some election times, because we look at this and it's like, these people are obviously bright enough to do better. Why aren't they? I guess there are things pulling at them, but yeah, I think anybody, regardless of your political persuasion, must look at this and go, what planet am I on here?
Why even bother to vote?
Yeah.
Why even bother to vote? And John Glenn is starting up the Public Policy Research Institute at OSU, named after him. And he even said the other day, look, I'm really concerned about the amount of young people out there who act like they don't have any direction, they don't really care about what's going on in politics because they don't have any trust in the system. We'll talk about that, Jim, when we come back. Got to take a break right here. You're watching live Ohio News Network coverage of the House Judiciary Committee hearings from Capitol Hill. We'll take a break here, and we'll come right back. Stay tuned. This is ONN.
By a plumber's unit, or broke into a psychiatrist's office for the purpose of obtaining records.
I understand your distinction.
All of those things would indeed rise to a level of scrutiny.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Hamilton.
Mr. Benvenisti making a pretty good point tonight regarding reprimand, and also the other point, and I can really sympathize with the 60-some% of the American populace out there, Jim, who say, just get this thing over with now, because the president has, what, a year and a half really left in office, and how long could an impeachment take in the Senate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, my thinking was, and this was a couple months ago, was that I perceive this to be dragging on until about Easter. Because I think it looks like a foregone conclusion now. It will probably go, there's these articles of impeachment, at least one is going to be passed. And it's going to drag out. I think well, think how court cases run. I mean, how often does a court case end abruptly?
Gets postponed.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be things drawn out. There's going to be all kinds of sidebars that are going to come up. So I think public opinion is fairly impatient. We want to get things moving on to the next thing. And this is going to be something that now, once we've opened the door, it's not just something we can shut the door and walk away very easily.
Pandora's box, in other words.
Yeah, because the precedent's set if we just open the door and walk away.
Today, one of the professors was bringing up the point of a lame duck Congress putting out an article of impeachment saying he doesn't necessarily believe that the Constitution will support that. However, Henry Hyde said yesterday that he thought that that was possible. He had talked to William Rehnquist, the Chief Justice. What's your outlook, or what do you think regarding a lame duck Congress voting out an article of impeachment and then having to take the process all the way back to square one? Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't know, John. It's a road we have not been down before. I can't help but think that they will have to bring in some scholars on this, people that have experience with it, to look at other precedents, not particularly in this one area, but maybe in other areas where, you know, a Congress may have acted and then, you know, we have another Congress coming up. I think there are enough precedents in other areas that we'll be able to have a track record. Well, this is the direction we need to go. And I can't help but think that there'll be agreement with, you know, that there'll be a collective voice saying, yeah, this is what we need to do. And even with that, there's bound to be some bannering. But I think that there will be a track set up, and then we'll, you know, decide we need to follow.
Final thoughts tonight, then, Jim. We are pretty sure that, in fact, we will have at least one article of impeachment, most likely perjury, but we could have obstruction of justice and also
abuse of power.
Abuse of power, exactly, and within obstruction, witness tampering. Do you think that this thing has a chance to make it out of the full House on a majority vote, as close as it is right now, Republican, Democrat?
You know, John, I do, because you know, 2 weeks ago, it doesn't seem like that there would have. It would have, but now the tide is turning on this slowly. I think there's a good chance of it, and it's just because of public opinion. And I don't even read this so much by the polls, but just what I hear from people around me, what I see going on in the media, and what I see here today.
The presidential word game.
Yeah. When I saw his response to those 81 questions, I'm thinking, oh, he's been advised terribly on this as far as his image, as far as who he is. I mean, just concretely, I don't mean image in the negative sense or, you know, a superficial way, but he just looks like he's running from this, and he has not come clean. And I think the reason he hasn't been come clean is that legally, if he answers these things too straightforward, he's opening up the door for future prosecution.
If anybody would even dare do that, and perhaps the ultimate reprimand censure will come in the form of impeachment and a trial in the Senate, regardless if there are votes there to convict or not. Let's go back now to the House Judiciary Committee hearing.
To perjury. There's been a great deal of comment today that we've heard about what happened in the Watergate situation, and that has established what I would call a very high bar for impeachment. I might say that this bar seems to be a lot more clear to
time. There is a civil case in which one party says X and the other party says Y, one says black, one says white. Usually after all of that happens, the matter goes to a trial if it's not settled before that, and then a jury decides, was it black, was it white, was it X, was it Y, and then the loser loses.
And what is the solution to this equation tonight then? Obviously 20-some years ago, things were a little bit more cut and dried, a little more obvious in the Nixon case, a little bit harder to see between the gray lines in the Clinton case. But Jim, as we go ahead and go now into where we are 20-some years later, we take a look about how everybody these days, you know, either gets divorced. Things are a lot different these days. People cheat on their wife all the time. You know, the president admitted that he's had this inappropriate conduct. But, you know, people cheat regardless if it's maybe on their wife, but they also cheat on test scores. And here you are, a professor. Have we not dumbed down the standards in this country?
Yeah, I think we've dumbed down the ethical standards. I mean, when ethics becomes so situational, where you can define anything, or you can define alone as not being alone, or when we're asking,
define is what
is. Yeah, I mean, where we get to the point where a person can feel comfortable making such an argument, and then we have people knowing that people are going to buy it and believe it and follow it, and you can use that as a defense. It kind of has an insidious effect. And by the way, this isn't something new. This is something societies go through. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. Aristotle warned of it. So my hope is we will get fed up with it. We'll come out of this. But yeah, I think we're right now at a disappointing low ebb with this.
All right, Jim Schnell, thanks for your time tonight. We appreciate it. Ohio, stay tuned. Primetime Ohio straight ahead.
I don't know. They think it started somewhere in the attic.
Suggested a comprehensive review, and preparations were made that such a review might take place in January. They could have waited till January, witnessed the review, heard what answer.
And there, Iraqi Prime Minister Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz saying that Chief UN Weapons Inspector Richard Butler is a cheap pawn in the hands of the United States. Richard Schnell from Ohio Dominican College saying that the U.S. basically used Butler to divert attention not only from President Clinton's failure in Israel, as Tariq Aziz says, but also from another matter which he would not mention, but I think we can kind of presume that we know what it is. What are your thoughts on this?
With Aziz, I think he's just picking up where he left off back during the Gulf War. I mean, we saw a lot of the similar kind of statements coming from him back in, 90, 91. So to me, he's just an older version of what we saw before. I think fairly predictable. It's kind of like a game of chess. It'd be expected for him to say, make those kinds of accusations. Yeah.
And also, if you look on your screen right there is Gerald Nadler speaking. The House debate, of course, has begun on the 4 articles of impeachment against President Clinton. We here at ONN will continue our live coverage throughout the day on this very historical day today. Writing in and listening to the news reports throughout the morning today, you have to wonder what kind of impact this impeachment proceeding is going to have on how foreign countries view the effectiveness of leaders here in the United States and our government.
Well, I tell you, Marjorie, something that underscores is, we look bad almost to the point of looking silly, but I think when it's all said and done, it shows that the system is working. We may not, everybody in the United States isn't going to get the outcome we want, but our framework, I think what the forefathers had in mind when they set this up, I think this is what they had in mind, and it shows the process works. I mean, for us to be showing all of this, to me it exemplifies that.
And we should remind people too, there is a distinction between impeachment and the Senate trial that many political analysts believe will in fact take place at this point. Impeachment does not necessarily mean that President Clinton is out of office.
No, and there's a lot of confusion about this with the American public. No, an impeachment does not put the president out. It just means he's been formally charged. And then he goes on to the Senate where they do try him, and then they can put him out of office. But yeah, an impeachment just means a charge has been made.
Okay. Well, right now, we are going to keep our eyes closely on the situation in Iraq, Operation Desert Fox, the 3rd day that is taking place right now. So we'll keep you posted and let you know what's happening with that as the day's developments warrant. But right now, we're going to go back to the live coverage in the House and see what's happening on the House floor with the debates continuing.
The President, several months before, had given false testimony in a deposition. The President was begged by members of both parties, in the House and the Senate, Mr. President, do not go into the grand jury and lie again. Do not give false or misleading or perjurious testimony again, because you put your presidency at stake. You do a disservice to this country. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, based on the facts, not based on my feelings, based on overwhelming facts, the President of the United States chose in August, months after being warned not to do it, he chose to lie to a federal grand jury. He abused the 23 citizens.
You have 17 and 1/2 minutes remaining. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to a distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Meehan.
You've been watching a live coverage, ONN live coverage of the House debate that just got underway this morning in the nation's capital. Last speaker there was James Rogan, a Democrat who also was on the House Judiciary Committee, saying that the evidence and the Congress's constitutional obligation is overwhelming in this case. Do they have to follow the guidelines and do the right thing, as James Rogan said, or can they kind of deter from that?
Well, I think they have a little leeway here, this way or that way, but they have to have good reason to break from the norm. So I think we're going to see them hold to the line as far as what they should be doing as far as going through the process. I think we're going to see the Democrats consistently, some of the Democratic leadership consistently request for a break from what the Republicans, the path they're taking them. But I think ultimately we're going to see this come to a vote. We're going to see the Democrats consistently suggesting anything but the vote, but I think we're going to see Republicans keep pushing that, especially the House Judiciary Committee, as far as what they've laid out here. That we're going to see it come to a vote, but we're going to have this bannering, somewhat orchestrated, but that's just the way politics works.
And Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott saying there's going to be no deal making in this case, that a Senate trial has to be held. Can the senators
in this case, if this does go to a Senate trial, as many political analysts believe it will, can the Senate do anything to overrule his opinion in this?
Well, you know, with politics, anything is open to interpretation, but every move is going to be open to scrutiny so much, not only now, but by historians. I don't think there would have to be an overwhelming amount of sentiment in the Senate to move Trent Lott from his position. So I don't really see him being moved. He might say, well, for him to already state no, for him to move from that position, I would just be very surprised.
We haven't heard from any Ohioans yet. Marcy Kaptur actually remains the only undecided Ohio representative so far. She's waiting to hear what happens in these proceedings today before she makes her decision. But the new development last night was with Bob Livingston, the announcement that he had strayed from his marriage, he said, on occasion. Do you think this was something planned by the Democrats to sort of put attention and focus on another individual?
You know, they're saying no. The White House is definitely saying no, and I don't think so. I think they knew about it, but I think they're probably glad that to some degree, I mean, it's playing into their hand pretty good, but I don't think they perpetuated it. And I don't really think it's going to affect this very much. At first, when I heard it, I thought, wow, this is going to be explosive. But really, it doesn't really have much to do with legally, logically, what President Clinton is facing. In that what Livingston has done as far as extramarital affair, he hasn't lied, he hasn't obstructed justice, he hasn't abused power. He's been guilty of an extramarital affair. He's fessed up, and I think they're going to move on. Now, on an emotional plane, I think if we're not looking at very logically, the American public is going to say, well, look, Henry Hyde did it, Livingston did it, President Clinton did it. Well, what's the difference? But the difference here is that it's not just an extramarital affair. It's those areas of lying, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. And I think the House has done a good job of staying on track with that. They're not beating a drum about Livingston's actions.
Do you find it unusual that President Clinton's job approval rating is so high with a 4-year investigation and the grand jury testimony and the Paula Jones case that has all happened and unraveled the country for so long? What do you attribute that to?
That he's done a good job. And I would say President Clinton has done a good job. But again, what they're looking for is not, they're not looking at has he done a good job. They're looking at did he lie, did he obstruct justice, did he abuse power. So it's not about whether he's doing a good job or not.
Okay, we're going to go back to the House floor where the debate on the 4 articles of impeachment continue this morning.
And it's something you can't treat with chemotherapy. You can't treat it with any drugs. You have to treat it with compassion and love. The president.
And you have been watching and listening to debate on the House floor. Impeachment hearings underway this morning. It'll last for about a couple of hours. And a stunning development just happened right now. Speaker-elect Bob Livingston just resigned his seat, not just as Speaker, but his entire seat. And joining me now, Jim Schnell, professor of political science at Ohio Dominican. What is your take on all this? Surprising developments today. Who could have thought?
Yeah, I can only think that he's doing this to kind of be an example for President Clinton, showing that he's stepping down because of his sexual misdeeds, and so President Clinton should. But logically, it doesn't really, it's different issues, because President Clinton is accused of perjury, accused of abuse of power, obstruction of justice. Livingston wasn't accused of any of those things. So I can't help but think he's playing on this emotional plane as far as that this is something he wants President Clinton to follow his example, and wants the nation to probably think that way. But wow, what a strong statement. And to me, logically, they're two different things. So it's impressive to me that he would do this, but logically, it doesn't. There's really not that much of a connection between his situation and President Clinton's situation. But yeah, it's quite. I mean, it's who knows what the next 2 hours are going to hold.
Of course, to get our viewers up to date, Speaker-elect Bob Livingston accused of an extramarital affair, and he spoke on that yesterday. And he said, of course, that his situation was different from the president's because he was never called to testify under oath about it, and it was not with an employee. So he said that his was different. Of course, today he resigned his seat, and it doesn't really match up.
Something that does kind of, there's a theme here, is that when Newt Gingrich stepped down, I think one of the main reasons he did is that the American public saw him as just this lightning rod negative symbol. So by stepping down, Gingrich allowed the prosecution of Clinton to move forward without him being the lightning rod, without him being the force behind it. And now with Livingston, in there. He's not so much like Newt Gingrich, but he's got this cloud over him, so perhaps he just felt like he should step down and get out of the way and let somebody who's even cleaner than he would be to come in, somebody who doesn't have an extramarital affair, which seems to be hard to find somebody like that, perhaps. Right. I don't know. But, you know, when they go digging into anybody's background, you know, we're human beings, and there are going to be things there, I suppose.
Skeletons in the closet. We want to return you now to debate underway on the House floor.
Back to our subject of this constitutional crisis in which we are all ensnared. But this cup cannot pass.
On this vote, the yeas are 228, the nays are 206. Article 1 is adopted.
Saturday, the U.S. House of Representatives impeached President Clinton. Monday, Time magazine names Bill Clinton and Kenneth Starr Men of the Year. Good evening, I'm Deborah Knapp in for John Portney. Tonight, Ohio's talking about impeachment and public opinion of our president.
Live from the ONN News Center in Ohio's capital city. Ohio issues, Ohio voices, Ohio people. Now, Ohio's talking on the Ohio News Network.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this Monday night. My guests tonight have been following the impeachment proceedings closely in public opinion since the House vote. Jim Schnell is a political science professor at Ohio Dominican College and ONN's political analyst. Also joining us on the phone tonight is Mike McConnell. He is the midday host on the big one, WLWAM 700 in Cincinnati and Ohio. We would also like to hear from you tonight. The toll-free comment lines are open. You can call us toll-free at 1-888-648-2557. Again, that is 1-888-648-2557. Or if you are calling from Columbus, you can call 280-6330. Again, 280-6330. Jim, let's start off with you tonight. This impeachment over the weekend from the full House, second time in history that we've seen. And guess what? The polls showed the public loves him, and the numbers have gone up. We've seen polls going from a 73% approval rating to a 9-point jump. Another poll said that. Why?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Deb, it's almost stranger than fiction. Yeah, he's had like a 67% approval rating. 58% of the American public feel he should fight this issue. But at the same time, 1/3 of the American public would not be angry with the Senate if they removed him. So I think what we have here, I don't see a lot of support for President Clinton overall. I see a lot of support for his presidency. I see a lot of support for the issues that he supports. I see a lot of support for the job he's doing. But as far as him, I don't think there's many people who believe him that he did not lie, that he did not obstruct justice.
But they still would not be angry if the Senate said it. You're out.
Yeah, yeah. So there's these different voices that we come from, and I think that we're seeing come forward. And I think it's hard to find that much concrete meaning out of the numbers at this point. And again, when it goes to our senators, I think what they need to do, they're the ones who are in the best position to look at all the evidence, look at what the Constitution says, look at what the Federalist Papers says, and even be wary of public opinion, because as we found the last month, it's been very fickle.
Let's bring in Mike McConnell on the phone, of course, host with WLW 700. Mike, some people will blame the Republicans for saying this, people aren't approving or are approving more of President Clinton because they don't like the way the Republicans are handling it. They're going against public opinion. Was this smart on their part?
Well, it's you have to look at the fact that they did go in the work in the face of public.
Welcome back to Ohio's Talking. I wonder if Larry Flint's going to be written up in our history books for kind of causing a stir in our Congress by tattletaling on some of these guys. Again, joining us on the phone today is Mike McConnell from WLW 700, the big one out of Cincinnati, conservative talk show host. Let's talk a little bit about the fact we've already talked. The polls are supporting President Clinton. Surprise? I don't know. But the stocks have rallied. The dollar has risen, and this is obviously a sign that financial markets don't view this as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Could that?
Well, it hasn't really. It really hasn't threatened very much. I mean, it certainly casts a shadow over us. Yeah, but people are going to work as normal. And let's say the Senate today. I was listening to a report on this that if the Senate does go to trial on this, they're talking about doing it in the evening so they can do regular business during the day, handle this during the evening, and then the American public can watch it live, or at least have access to hearing about it live.
I just see major changes going on, and obviously it's not making an effect. Mike, any comment on that?
Well, the stock market, and I'm not a broker either, but
Hey, you're supposed to be an expert on everything. Talk show hosts are supposed to, aren't they?
Well, I am. I just claim not to be. The market tends to react to what may happen as opposed to what actually does. If what happens is what was pretty much expected, then you.
President Clinton is going to walk out of this. He could walk out scot-free if the Senate decides to throw it out, but he will always be marked by the fact that he was impeached by the full House, only second president in history to do so. Let's talk about some of the other options here. What can happen?
Well, yeah, that would be one, is that they, it does go to trial, and then they decide, for whatever reason, they don't get enough votes to put him out, and then that's an interesting scenario. Is, well, then what? And I imagine he would just kind of keep,
walk away.
More of the same old, same old. But yeah, as far as, there could be censure at the other end. I can't help but think there's going to be some kind of trial out of this, but I don't know, when it does end, there'll be some interesting summarizations as far as what does this mean. One thing I think I'm pleased about it as an American citizen is that it shows the system is working. We may not be getting what we want. Everybody may not be getting the funding they want, but it does show to the world that we have a system and it does work. And even though it's showing our dirty laundry, it is at least showing that we are a nation of laws, and there aren't many countries that can do that.
Mike, any suggestions on what we're likely to see?
No, I hate the crystal ball, but I agree that this is the system at work. Those who claim that the Republicans somehow were overturning an election, not the case. We elected two people. One is there.
And thanks again, Ohio. We are always listening.
Space and time. Send check or money order for $16.95 to Dispatch Productions Incorporated, 41 South.
In the oath of office, the United States House of Representatives has a brand new Speaker of the House tonight, Dennis Hastert, and also new senators today, including former Ohio Governor George Voinovich. And boy, will he have a very busy day tomorrow as the Senate convenes the impeachment trial. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Fortney. Tonight, Ohio's talking about the 106th Congress.
Live from the ONN News Center in Ohio's capital city. Ohio issues, Ohio voices, Ohio people. Now, Ohio's talking on the Ohio News Network.
Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to take a look at the issues facing the members of the 106th Congress. Right now, I'm joined by ONN political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim is a political science professor at Ohio Dominican College and has been following the goings-on in Washington, D.C. Joining us in just a little bit from D.C. is U.S. Representative David Hobson from Springfield, Ohio. We were also expecting to have Congressman Jim Traficant on tonight, but late this evening he called and said he had other business that came up and he had to cancel on us, but we will have Representative Hobson in about 10 minutes. Jim, thank you for your time tonight. We do appreciate it. Everybody out there in Ohio, thank you for joining us as well. Remember, you too can be part of our conversation. Just call the toll-free number right there on your screen. Questions or comments, again, that's anywhere, toll-free in the state of Ohio at 1-888-648-2557. Or in the capital city tonight, you can call 280-6330. Well, I tell you what a time to be in D.C. The 106th House of Representatives, Jim, sworn in today. New leadership, Dennis Hastert, Dick Gephardt, the minority leader, handing over the gavel today and saying, let's bury the hatchet. Wink, wink. I wonder if we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I tell you, John, these are very interesting times. I think the American public is getting a little tired of the story, but it is of such immense proportions it cannot be ignored. I think a lot of people are following the basketball situation, but basketball seasons will come and go. What we're doing with the presidency, not just President Clinton, but the presidency overall, this is monumental, and it's going to be a precedent we may see in the future.
Kids most likely will not be reading and studying and taking a test on the NBA lockout that ended today in their history class 5-10 years down the road, but you can bet that this certainly is a piece of history that will be recorded, a Senate trial the first time since 1868.
Oh yeah, and it will have repercussions down the road, not just about the presidency, but how we govern our nation. I think it's very good in that it shows the system is working. The system is working as it should, and it will show, I think, in the long term that nobody's above the law. That is, we have the letter of the law is very important. This is something that we follow, even the president. But also the president's ability. I mean, this is going to affect future presidents and their willingness to step out on a limb. With legislation they're promoting, that sort of thing, where they don't want to get too unpopular with Congress, obviously. God forbid that they would, fall victim of anything like an impeachment.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to make future presidents have a little bit more trepidation. So it's going to affect governance, things that we will push through for legislation, new ideas, anything like Social Security as an example. But down the road, I think, for 20, 30 years it'll be an issue.
This is a totally different era. Here we are 1 year away from the 21st century, but you would go back 50 years, you go back 100 years, or just to the days where radio was really becoming something that everybody had in their house. It was a totally different political scene then compared to now, because now public opinion is instant. We can run a 1-800 number, we have the internet, and everybody has some news network like the Ohio News Network. They're out there, so they get instant reaction back, and it's really turning out to be either you govern by polls or you govern by what you think is right in the law, and by golly, you can die at the cross either way.
Absolutely. I think Trent Lott did himself and the country a favor by kind of backing, he
backed it off.
Yeah.
Didn't have to.
Yeah, but he left his phone machine on saying, out of town, and didn't respond, and took a break there, because I think he needs to, he has a very crucial role here, and again, I think he understands that he can't govern by public opinion. We have to govern by the letter of the law.
Do you think that his job could be in jeopardy because of the Senate trial coming up? The White House would like to see a speedy trial. We heard tonight from Mr. Lott just hours ago from the floor of the U.S. Senate holding a press conference that, well, we could see this go well into February now. How in jeopardy, how jeopardized is his position as majority leader in the Senate?
I'll tell you, John, there is talk about him being in some jeopardy here, but I don't see it. I think he's playing this close to the vest as far as thinking this through literally, as far as not just the short term but the long term. I think he's too smart of a politician, and perhaps just an individual overall, to get sucked into any one direction. But the only thing I think that could hurt him is if there's some skeleton in his closet, that kind of thing. And this is what's been taking people down. So if he doesn't have anything like that going on in his life, I think he'll be able to hold on.
Isn't it painfully ironic still? I think people are finally just kind of go, wow, we're learning really the breadth of this whole situation, the size of this situation, when Saturday of the actual impeachment vote, Bob Livingston standing there at the podium saying the president should resign, and from the background you could hear some of the Democratic Congress people saying, you resign, and they said, and because of that, I'm going to resign. So we lost him, Bob Livingston, and then we lost Newt Gingrich first before that, and here really the whole situation was started by Bill Clinton. So everybody seems to be in some kind of a political jeopardy.
Well, yeah, John, back in September when we started dealing with this issue, when it was really coming to the forefront, one of the things we talked about was how this was going to have ripple effects in other areas of American life. And as far as politicians' personal lives, look how they're coming to the forefront. When Larry Flint gets in on the action, as far as having dirt on people, and I think everybody's life is going to be, anybody in the public light is going to be under scrutiny. And I think what we've seen here with Livingston resigning the way he did, I think he played it well as a trump card. Like, I guess if you're going to leave, leave in a flare, don't just back out. But I mean, he used that as very good political maneuvering on his part. But what a shame that we have to lose leaders like that in those kinds of circumstances.
Let me take a phone call right here, and I just want to remind everybody that here, coming up in our second segment tonight, we will be talking live with Congressman Dave Hobson, a Republican from the 7th District of the great state of Ohio. That's coming up right after our first break tonight. But out to Middletown, Ohio tonight, and Lola Poley. Hi, go right ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to know about Vonovich. What are they going to do about that campaign money?
That's really interesting. Everybody
sort of know who we're voting for.
Exactly. Everybody kind of has a scandal these days, and wasn't it very interesting, Jim, that the day of the November election, the morning of, the Cleveland Plain Dealer headlines, Voinovich accused of money laundering, yet today raised his hand, took the oath of office from Al Gore, and he's going to be taking a hard look at the facts, according to him, as this Senate trial does convene, yet he does have something hanging over his head as well.
Yeah, and that's where, when I saw Voinovich, I don't know really what's going on in his mind, but, Mike DeWine is saying that, we need to push forward with a trial.
No censure, either or.
Yeah, which is a fairly hard line compared to Voinovich. Voinovich has been fairly soft on this, and so one has to wonder, well, why is he playing? Usually I think of Voinovich as being a fairly hard liner. You look at the way he governed the state of Ohio. But yeah, I think he has a definite problem there as far as what's going to happen with this campaign financing. And I don't know, there's a variety of these things going on, not just with Voinovich, but other politicians, these independent councils, they're looming around.
I think if you're not squeaky clean and have not moved either way and were afraid to introduce any major legislation, if you don't have any enemies at all, maybe you have done nothing. It's kind of like in this business, if you're not making somebody mad, well, maybe you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
I wonder, too, if the White House might be the teeniest bit scared You know, we heard a lot about, we hope that the House members vote their conscience, vote your conscience, do what you think is right. But then I was scratching my head like, right, I'm sure they really want them to vote their conscience, but now that it's in the Senate, it really comes down to a matter not of conscience, but judging the facts, one or the other.
Yeah.
Will the White House be concerned, do you think? Everybody said there's no way that they're going to convict this president, but now Mr. Byrd comes out and has some very interesting comments, longtime Democrat.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think his comment, well, you know, it made a big splash when he said it, but what he said, it's a logical statement to make. Now, he knows there's going to be ripples from it, but it's a logical statement to make that, well, yes, of course you would listen to the facts, and of course you would base your decision on the facts. It should be a no-brainer, but it sends ripples through the political community. I think that, wow, I mean, here's a leading Democrat saying something like this, that he may vote the other way. Well, of course he should consider the facts. His mind shouldn't be made up at this point.
Let's take a couple more phone calls tonight. Reverend Jeannie Woodward. Hi, Reverend. Go right ahead, ma'am.
Hi, John.
Hi.
I have two questions for the consultant. The first question is, Ken Starr should have recused himself as prosecuting attorney. He was not objective, and the Attorney General, Janet Reno, was not privy to this information that he had been in contact with Paula Jones's attorney as early as 1994. Now, I want to get his opinion of that. And the second one is this. All of the charges of perjury, of obstruction of justice, are all emanating from a sexual, consensual affair, which is not impeachable. It looks like they've got the train, the train started to roll, and they weren't able to stop it, but the whole thing is ridiculous. It sounds like a kangaroo court, a dog and pony show, and I hope that the senators will show some intelligence and just adjourn this thing and say that they are out of order on the whole partisan affair. One other question. When the House of Representatives opened up the impeachment hearings, the clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives read something, and I guess it's the protocol. It said that the House of Representatives and the people of the United States are bringing these charges against the president.
Yeah.
The people of the United States, 63 or 70%, do not want this impeachment.
That's a good point. Well, let's pick up the first question then. That was one of the big issues, obviously. Ken Starr maybe was not completely open with Janet Reno. The correct thing there, I think a lot of people would have to agree, was she should have appointed somebody else to handle the other case. So, your observations on that.
Yeah, Starr there was a mistake made there, but I think in something this big, as far as all the months that this lingered on, there's bound to be things like that that are going to come up. I think Starr, I think he was I don't think he planned for it to unfold that way, because he knows he's going to have the finger pointed at him for this happening. So yes, I think he should take a hit on that. Say, yep, a mistake was made in that area.
And then the other big question, obviously, that she brought up was, okay, so this resulted from a sexual affair that emanated. It was consensual affair, but that does not rise to the level of the standard of impeachable offenses. However, the House has already voted on that. But is there anything you think the Senate will? I guess the question would be, do you think the Senate will then just close her down?
Well, I'm glad this issue came up, because this was something I think was recognizable back in the fall, is that even though this started, the foundation of this grows out of the president's consensual sexual relationship between he and Monica Lewinsky. What he's in trouble for is not the sexual relationship. What he's in trouble for is two things. One, lying to a grand jury, and two, obstructing justice. So lying to the grand jury and obstructing justice is that's what he was impeached for, not for having the sexual relationship. So the American public needs to get that into their mind, that this is what they're after him for. I mean, this idea of a sexual relationship, that's not even secondary. That's not that big of a deal. But that he lied about it to the grand jury, not just to journalists, to the American public, but that he lied about it to a grand jury, and that he obstructed justice.
All right, let me stop here, take a break tonight. I know I have a couple more callers on the line tonight. Hold the line. We'll get right to you. But when we come back tonight, we'll be talking to Congressman Dave Hobson, Republican from the 7th.
We are joined with Jim Schnell, who is ONN's political analyst. He's also professor from the Ohio Dominican college here in the state of Ohio, and he'll be giving us analysis on the events of today and what we can expect. And as we can see now, members preparing to approach the Senate chambers, I believe. Jim joins us now in the studio. Jim, this is a momentous day today, even though it could be just ceremonial.
Yeah, Deborah, it's going to be fairly cut and dried here. Really, I think most of today, I don't think there's going to be that much excitement. But it's procedural. It's kind of a process we need to go through. It's part of the Senate protocol, and we will see a lot of protocol here, that they have a lot of, some might think of it like pomp and circumstance, but there's a lot of procedural matters that need to be done a certain way. It's kind of like a meeting run by parliamentary procedure. So we'll see a lot of due process, not a lot of excitement. Before I came down to the studio today, I just turned on the television just to see what different networks were covering, and I saw, I believe it was on Jerry Springer, there were two women physically fighting, and I thought, over some guy, and I thought, well, that's going to be more exciting. That's going to draw a lot of more viewers. But this is obviously much more important. So this
momentous and the historic value of this. And as we saw the members of the House walking through the chambers going towards the Senate with the impeachment articles, and you saw flash bulbs going, and obviously a group just surrounding this. This is again, it's just so momentous watching this happen, and what will happen from here on out. We just are going to have to wait and see. It seems like it's a lot of uncertainty on how they're going to go about this. I mean, is there going to be votes on this? Is there going to be votes on that? And how they're going to handle the trial? Yeah, I think Trent Lott is going to have a lot of impact, and I think he knows that. I think, you know, he took that time off where he basically wasn't even returning phone calls over the holidays. And I think what they probably have a sense of, I know it's something I'm thinking about, is that this is happening now to a president. This could easily happen within the next 50 years again, and this is going to be the precedent. What they do now will set the precedent if this happens again, say in the next 50, 70 years or so. So they need to make sure they do it right. They need to be very deliberate, because every little move is going to be scrutinized. Like Kenneth Starr's investigation now is being scrutinized for every little thing that they might have done wrong. Well, this is going to be even of a much more important than Kenneth Starr's investigation. So they're going to need to make sure they do it right, and really they only have one time to do it right. They can't back up. Jim, I think that they are getting ready to convene, banging the gavel. Let's take a little listen. This is Senator Strom Thurmond. Oh, apparently we don't have audio going on, so we'll just have to watch him bang the gavel. Well, he's basically calling the House, you know, to order, and he's going to be the motions that you have to go through. Not terribly exciting, but something we all have to hear, and something that they have to go through as well. And it's again can be adjourned until 1 o'clock, so we can expect a little bit more action, or not so much. Oh, I think today it's going to be pretty bland. I don't think there's going to be much going on. And the only thing that would make this exciting to any degree is if there's something that happens external to the proceedings that impacts an individual in the proceeding. But yeah, I think today it's going to be fairly cut and dried. But it should be. We shouldn't be disappointed in this. Is that, you know, we're so used to so much excitement on the air, and something always riveting our attention. This has been kind of a juicy story too. I mean, coming the whole way through. But something as important as removing a president, this needs to slow down. It needs to go through the paces, so we know every block has been checked, every base has been covered the way it should be. So it is procedural. It's not something that should be rushed through. A lot of arguing, anything like that. A lot of rush. It needs to be very procedural. Again, we're going to see a lot of parliamentary procedure in action here, and you know, it'll be very a lot of enforced rules, as it should be. Now, we also saw Henry Hyde introduce some of the House Judiciary members, and we have heard the Democrats are not going to come into this. They've made their stand that they are not going to have a part of this, but they have to, don't they? I mean, this is something they have to be a part of. Yeah, even if they don't physically show their presence, they know that they are represented there. So as far as the procedure, you know, the whole process moving on, it will continue to do that. They're just kind of, it's just, to me, that's just one of those little public shows, symbolic gestures. Partisan.
Yeah, the same way they marched off, you know, over to, you know, to show support for the president after the House voted last time, and that's all right. You know, I don't hold that against the Democrats. You know, we're going to see a lot of politicking here. By the way, a lot of symbolic gestures will be going on as well, where it seems like, wow, that's really quite a stand for them to take, but it's just really kind of a minor, you know, deal as far as a minor gesture. Just more of the
almost the drama in it, making a symbol.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's take a look at what we can expect for later on today at 1 o'clock. They are expected to reconvene, and at that time, Chief Justice Rehnquist will be escorted.
We're going to see a lot of, impromptu events here, as far as you would think. Yeah, as far as how do we bring in the Chief Justice. I imagine this morning there were people running around there going, how do we do this? Well,
right. Just you and you.
Yeah, we haven't done it in so long, so it's basically, this is just typical. It's a very small part of it, but it's typical is that whatever they do, the next time this happens, people are going to go back to this video and go, well, see, they had 3 lined up over here, 3 lined up over there, and they're going to follow that. So that's just a minor thing, but even on the larger issues, it'll be the same kind of thing where they're going to set the tone. That's why they want to get it right.
Wow. Okay. Up next after that, Rehnquist will make a brief statement. So he will be addressing the Senate, and we will see what's going to happen, right?
Yep, and I'll tell you, Deborah, I think, to me, it's going to be, for anybody who's ever been in a wedding before,
right.
I think it's going to be a lot like that, where people are going to be going, what do I do, where do I stand, and there'll be one person, I'm sure there's one person who's kind of the ringleader of this, and hopefully that person knows, well, I'm sure the person does, as far as what goes where and how is this done. Because there'll be a lot of things like that going on, but it'll basically set the precedent for the future, and it has a foothold in the past, but I think we'll just take this one day at a time, and it's like anything else. There'll be some high points and then there'll be some low points, but it's something we definitely need to go through. Once this is started, we just don't go out. The ratings aren't high enough, let's back out.
Right.
Once we start it,
going.
we've got to follow through.
All right, thank you so much. Jim Schnell with us in the studio with us today, O&M political analyst. And of course, you can tune into the Ohio News Network. At 1 o'clock, we will have complete and full coverage of these proceedings as they continue. Thanks again, Jim.
My pleasure.
We'll see you back here. We are going to return you now to Ohio's Talking, which is already in progress.
A little more than 6 hours after it started this morning, the House prosecutors rested their case in the U.S. Senate chamber just about a half hour ago in this impeachment trial against the president. Of course, the prosecutors have to convince at least 2/3 of the senators in the Senate chamber that the president should be removed from office for those charges of obstruction of justice and for perjury. Now, while we refer to the impeachment proceedings as a trial, it will not necessarily look like trials that you often see on television or maybe have been involved in the Franklin County Courthouse or Municipal Courthouse. We'd like to bring in Ohio Dominican political science professor Jim Schnell to help us with the differences in this case. Thanks, Professor, for coming in today. Mr. Schnell, I would like to know, though, really, what is it that confuses the people about the rules we're seeing this procedure undertaking now and what we would see in a normal court of law?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities, but I think where the public's getting frustrated is the public wants to express its viewpoint and wants to be heard, whereas actually I think we've already expressed our views as a public by voting our elected officials, in this case our senators, and we should sit back and let them govern because that's what they're there to do. We've elected them, we should let them govern.
Political science professor, I would imagine you would like to see witnesses in a case like this?
Oh, I think so. Think about any normal trial. Of course, there'd be witnesses. Now, in support of the argument that we don't need witnesses, we can't say we've already had witnesses to a degree, as far as what we saw in the House. But I think it would be fair for the Senate to say, yeah, we would like to see more witnesses, especially given the gravity of this. And I think something that we should be encouraged by is that this shows how well our system is working, in that we are following the procedural format. It's going to be fairly painstaking, especially if we get into the process of having witnesses. But this is what the process was laid out by the forefathers, when the nation was set up, as far as this is what we were to do when we were confronted with this kind of situation. Granted, there is a lot of room for interpretation. At the same time, though, I think you can be very supportive of President Clinton. You can say President Clinton has done an excellent job, but at the same time, given the situation he's in, we need to follow a process.
Mr. Schnell, as a professor, as a teacher of political science, what kind of questions are your students asking about this? Because after all, they've only read about it. It hasn't happened for 131 years. We've heard that all night long.
Well, the question that seems to come up the most I think comes back to this idea that, well, a majority of the American public, from what we've seen in the public opinion polls, support the idea that President Clinton should not be removed. So I think most of the students that I'm working with tend to be hung on this idea that, we should be listening to public opinion rather than what our elected officials are saying.
And tying up the legislative process.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Jim Schnell from the Ohio Dominican College, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate it very much.
My pleasure, Dave.
As we have said, these are the senators and congressmen that you voted.
In the exact words he did until I started reading this transcript carefully at this hearing.
And you can bet the White House certainly is focusing and concentrating on every bit of what is being said today. Joining me today in the studio is O&M political analyst Jim Schnell, who is a professor at Ohio Dominican College and also specializes in something called political rhetoric. A lot of rhetoric and some of the best parts coming from Bill McCollum today regarding plain old vanilla bribery, rates of 10. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, it's something, yeah, his use of terms is a little confusing, but something that impressed me, and I think he's doing a good job, is this idea of the numerical ordering. That's something that we as the American public, even if somebody just tuning in, can look at his graphics and go, oh yeah, I understand the idea of as far as, you know, something lower number is going to be not as strong, something higher number, would be stronger. And so I think he's doing a nice job of taking some basic logic and building on that. And different people with different degrees of sophistication can tune into it at whatever level they understand from.
In other words, taking a lot of the spin machine out of it, trying to take the politics out of it. Look, this is perjury, this is obstruction of justice. He said if bribery rates a simple old 10 on the serious meter, that witness tampering would be a 12, perjury would be a 12, and he said think of this as one big obstruction.
Yeah,
So.
and this helps take away that spin. I mean, where he's still being interpretive, but I think he's kind of like taking away a lot of that interpretive element as far as just putting a spin on it and putting it again in a context that we, the viewing public, can look at this and kind of make sense out of what all of this evidence adds up to, because that's what our representatives are doing here as far as, you know, they're going through all the evidence and then picking out the main points. Something else I think he's doing a great job is taking the Lewinsky testimony. And that line about where she said that I've heard so many times from the White House, where she says President Clinton didn't.
No one asked me to lie.
Yeah, nobody asked me to lie or was going to give me a job, that kind of stuff. But nobody also told me to tell the truth either.
Nobody discouraged me either, and that's something we never hear about.
Yeah, and that's the other part of that statement. So he's putting that in the correct context, and we need to hear that.
Maybe on a more critical note, it seems like every time the Mr. Managers, the House prosecutors, come out, they always want to take it upon themselves and remind the Senate that it is their duty to do impartial justice.
Yeah, this is starting to get a little bit old, and I think if I was a senator, I would start to get a little jaded about that. I mean, almost like turn off and start thinking of a list of other things I need to be doing right now when you hear that. Now, so I think, you know, after another day or two, they probably ought to lay off that, because that's valuable time. It doesn't seem like it is, but they only have a limited amount of time, and they ought to use every minute of that.
Yeah, and they will be going ahead and presenting more testimony tomorrow. By the way, throughout the day, when Bill McCollum, right there you're watching, when he finishes up, we'll hear from George Gekas. But we'll also be hearing from the only member serving as a manager in the House prosecutor's role will be Steve Shabbat. He's the Ohio representative, the Republican out of Cincinnati. After that, Bob Barr will be hearing from him. He'll be finishing up the evening. That'll be pretty interesting, Jim, because Bob Barr recently came under heavy scrutiny this week because of Larry Flint's allegations against Bob Barr.
Yeah. So he's a little clouded, but really what Flint came up with on him, he didn't perjure himself. He didn't, obstruct justice. You know, this business about the abortion his wife had, did he support it, did he not, and how that conflicts with his professional position as a representative. Yeah, he can take some hits there, but I think he's going to be able to shake it off, and most people. I think the worst thing is he's had to kind of defend himself against a Flint allegation. He is a little clouded, but he's...
And then later voted to acquit Judge Nixon because it was redundant, complex.
White House counsel Charles Ruff addressing the U.S. Senate members who are serving as jurors now, hearing the opening statements for President Clinton's defense. Joining us today is O&M political analyst Jim Schnell. Jim, what's your overall sense of what type of a job Charles Ruff is doing?
Well, I think he's done a nice job of kind of giving some rehash of what we saw in the Paula Jones case, as far as the impeachment that was done by the House of Representatives, and then kind of bringing us up to present. Moving into present, almost into the future, he's taking parts of the Federalist Papers that support his case. I think most important is this idea that the president should be removed only if he's done something to threaten the system of government. And that, that's quite a reach to say, what the president has done, if he is found guilty, if that threatens our system of government. So I think he's just laying this out, really laying a groundwork of some logical pieces they can come back later to stand on.
He also quoted Alexander Hamilton saying along the same lines that impeachment should be only for immediate injuries done to society. And I guess a lot of the Democrats are saying, well, no, this does not rise to an impeachable offense, citing the constitutional deficiency there, and also talking about the language that the framers had and the intent that they had when drafting the Constitution.
Yeah, back when the framers of the Constitution put this together, you can tell that their definitions for some of these terms are different than the way we use these today. Even the expression high crimes and misdemeanors, well, high crime to us would be a felony, and a misdemeanor would be much lower. So to put a high crime with a misdemeanor is confusing, and I think we're going to have a lot of interpretation of these terms.
Okay, we're going to interrupt you real quickly, Jim. They're taking a break. Let's hear what Majority Leader Schnell has to say. Okay, and again, the U.S. Senate is taking a 15-minute break. They're going to wrap up pretty quickly today, too, because, of course, President Clinton is giving his State of the Union address today, which has caused a lot of controversy among the House as well as the Senate in Washington.
Yeah, that's just, I think, holding his position that the business will go on as usual, and he's not going to step down from his position as president to get caught up in the fray, and that to me is that whole symbolic image of being presidential. And I can't really fault him for it. I mean, the State of the Union, if he feels it should be delivered, I don't really think it helps him or hurts him in the long run to do it.
How important will what he has to say tonight, or will it make a difference? Is it of any importance to the proceedings that are taking place in the Senate chambers? Well,
his content that he's going to be delivering that we've seen thus far that's been released by the White House is really something that a first-term president would be putting out, not a second-term president, in the 7th year of office. As far as he's got a lot of new ideas put forward, so I think he's kind of been questioned with that. But I think it'll be received much like we've seen in the past. I mean, obviously, it's all done in the backdrop of this trial that's going on. So I don't know how serious it'll be taken, but I don't really even know how serious the State of the Union addresses are taken. As far as they tend to be a lot of lofty ideals. Here's some ideas. But nothing, as far as nailing down this much of the budget here, that much of the budget there, as far as concrete terms that we know that we're going to follow.
Well, the recent numbers show that 81% of the public surveyed believe that President Clinton is doing an effective job in his capacity. And earlier we just heard Charles Ruff quote Judge Charles Wiggins, who testified in the House impeachment proceedings. And at that time, Judge Wiggins said that the standard for impeachment should be that of the public interest. So how much of a role should public interest and what the people have to say in all this make in the decision the senators will make?
Well, this comes back to, I think, as it consistently comes back to a very interesting point with this, is that nobody's questioning his ability to govern. That there would be 81%, which is incredibly high numbers, they're great numbers, supporting his legislation. That is basically overall his ability as president to lead us. Nobody's questioning that. What he's in trouble for here is lying and obstruction of justice. And really, doesn't have much of a case for getting past this lying and obstruction of justice. So it's a strange thing in that he's really, I think most people would agree, even his harshest critics would say, he's really done a pretty good job as president. I mean, he's done, we always have bipartisan bickering going on, but he's done a good job. But that isn't what he's in trouble for. That isn't what he's under scrutiny for, is not whether or not he's done a good job. It's just this minute area of dealing with a personal sexual affair, of whether or not he lied and obstructed justice, and that becomes a very big issue, which again doesn't affect his ability to govern. Is the law of the land more important than how well we think he's doing? It's going to be a strange issue because again, so much of this is open to interpretation. The terminology is open to interpretation. Even the rules that they're governing by, as far as running this impeachment, they can be rearranged based on, if the Senate decides to say, well, no, by at least half vote, let's change this policy a little bit as far as how we're going to judge it.
I think back to my constitutional law days back in law school, and we were always taught that the Constitution was meant to be a living, breathing document, therefore it should change with the times. And so you wonder if the framers, would they have allowed public opinion to be taken into consideration in an impeachment trial? Or is it way beyond what they ever intended?
I don't think they could even begin to comprehend the role of public opinion. I mean, we have a whole industry that's based now, not all mass media, but a whole industry within mass media that's just focused on scrutinizing politicians that they did not have then. I mean, they didn't have radio, television, I mean, they had newspapers, but I don't think they could begin to fathom what the president operates in today. So I'm not sure where, you know, I think they did an excellent job, the framers of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, you know, to give us a foundation to work from. But yeah, it's purposely vague, and it should be, because it is, the Constitution is a living, breathing, constantly changing document, as it should be.
One of the things that I found interesting today is the discussion of the standard. We were talking about impeachable offenses, Charles Ruff, and he brought up whether the standard should be different for the office of the president, because this is a public official that can be reelected and booted out of office if he does a bad job every 4 years, whereas federal judges are appointed for life. I mean, should there be a difference between federal judges and a different standard for federal judges versus the President of the United States? Which I have to say, personally, I have a problem with, because we think of the President as the chief enforcing officer of the laws of the country.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's good for Ruff to bring that up, is that, yeah, since the President is only going to be up for, you know, 4 years at a time and can be put out of office, legitimate point, and it's one that the senators can weigh. I personally would say that that the president should be held accountable. And again, we come back to, I don't think that many people are questioning his guilt with, as far as, you know, engaging in this affair, that sort of thing, maybe lying, obstructing justice, whatever. But does it rise to the level, you know, that he should be removed from office? It's a very tough issue to resolve this. But yeah, it's legitimate for Ruff to bring this out, that you know, that judges, you know, federal judges should be held to a different level, especially if he's quoting from the Federalist Papers. I mean, it's good content that he can stand on. Something I do want to throw in here is this idea, I heard this over the weekend, is that, and I think it's good news for this process, is that there may be two votes, one on whether or not President Clinton lied and obstructed justice, and the other one being, should he be removed from office. So this will, even if he's not removed from office, at least that first vote will allow the country to be able to, I think, sleep at night, knowing that, yes, he's been found guilty of these things. If he is guilty, maybe he isn't, but if he is guilty, that he's been found guilty, but it's just not serious enough to remove from office. I think as a precedent for the future, it's something we can put in our history books, and something we can look at, really, you know, we can look at our Constitution and say, yes, it is valid, that there has been a due process, and that even the president is accountable. That, you know, that our system of laws, the rule of law, is a very important phenomenon to us, because in other countries around the world it just isn't. Right.
All right, we are going to take a very quick break right now. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening in Washington and the Senate chambers. Of course, President Clinton's defense team presenting their case right now. We'll be back in a moment after the break with much more.